Welcome to Moments in History channel. Picture this. It's the summer of 1940. Nazi Germany has swept across Europe like a storm, conquering France in just a few weeks. The British army has been forced into a desperate retreat from Dunkirk. Now, only the narrow English Channel separates Great Britain from the seemingly unstoppable might of Hitler's war machine. The future of the free world hangs by a thread. Britain stands alone, defiant, and braced for invasion. But before any German boots could touch British soil, Hitler knew he had to achieve one critical objective: control the skies. This set the stage for one of the most decisive and legendary conflicts of World War II. A battle fought not on land or sea, but in the air. This is the story of the Battle of Britain. Today we're taking a deep dive into the summer of 1940, when a few hundred pilots became the last line of defense against tyranny. The Battle of Britain wasn't just a series of dogfights. It was a clash of technology, tactics, and sheer human will that would change the course of history forever. After the fall of France, Hitler was confident that Britain, isolated and facing overwhelming odds, would sue for peace. He even offered terms, but Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, delivered a resounding no. In a famous speech, Churchill rallied his nation, declaring they would fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields, and in the streets. They would never surrender. With this defiance, Hitler had no choice but to activate his plan for a full-scale invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. But invading across the Channel was an incredibly risky move. The Royal Navy was still a formidable force, and any German invasion fleet would be vulnerable without protection from the air. The head of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, boasted that his planes could obliterate the Royal Air Force, or RAF, in a matter of weeks. He believed that once the RAF was shattered, Britain's spirit would break, and the invasion would be a mere formality. So, the primary objective was clear: gain absolute air superiority over southern England and the Channel. The Luftwaffe was a terrifying force. It was battle-hardened from campaigns in Poland, Norway, and France, and it outnumbered the RAF in almost every category of aircraft. They had a massive fleet of bombers, like the Heinkel He-111 and the Junkers Ju-88, escorted by one of the most advanced fighters of the time, the Messerschmitt Bf-109. On paper, the odds were stacked heavily against the British. But Britain had some crucial advantages up its sleeve. First, they were fighting over home territory. If an RAF pilot was shot down, they could bail out, be rescued, and potentially be back in the cockpit of another plane within hours. A German pilot shot down over England, however, became a prisoner of war. This simple fact of geography had a massive impact on pilot attrition rates. Second, the British had two phenomenal fighter aircraft, the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. The Hurricane was a sturdy, reliable workhorse. It was less glamorous than the Spitfire, but it was responsible for shooting down more enemy aircraft during the battle than all other defenses combined. And then there was the Spitfire, with its elegant elliptical wings and powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It became the symbol of British resistance. It was fast, incredibly agile, and could go toe-to-toe with the best the Luftwaffe had to offer, the Bf-109. But perhaps Britain's greatest secret weapon wasn't an airplane at all. It was a revolutionary technology called radar. A chain of radar stations along the south coast, known as the Dowding system, could detect incoming German formations long before they reached the English coast. This information was relayed to a central command hub at RAF Fighter Command Headquarters. Here, a brilliant and understated commander, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, had devised an ingenious system of integrated air defense. Information from radar, the observer corps, and radio intercepts was plotted on a massive map table in the operations room. Controllers could see the entire battle unfolding in real time. They knew the altitude, speed, and direction of enemy raids, allowing them to scramble just enough fighters to intercept them at precisely the right moment. This meant the RAF didn't have to waste fuel or pilot energy on constant patrols. They could husband their limited resources and meet the enemy with maximum efficiency. It was a system the Germans knew little about and drastically underestimated. The battle is generally seen as having unfolded in four main phases. The first, beginning in early July 1940, was called the Kanalkampf, or the Channel Fight. The Luftwaffe focused its attacks on British shipping convoys in the English Channel, trying to lure RAF fighters into large-scale dogfights and wear them down. It was a brutal opening round, a war of attrition that tested the nerves and endurance of pilots on both sides. Then, on August 13th, a day the Germans called Adlertag, or Eagle Day, the main assault began. This marked the start of the second phase. The Luftwaffe shifted its focus inland, launching massive raids against RAF airfields, command centers, and radar stations in the south of England. The goal was to smash Fighter Command on the ground before it could even get into the air. This was the most critical period of the battle. Day after day, German bombers pounded the airfields. Hangars were destroyed, runways were cratered, and ground crews worked tirelessly under constant threat of attack to repair planes and get them flying again. The pressure on the RAF was immense. They were losing planes and, more importantly, experienced pilots at an alarming rate. At one point, the system was stretched to its absolute breaking point. The Germans came perilously close to achieving their objective. But the RAF pilots, a mix of British airmen and volunteers from Commonwealth nations like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and other occupied countries, refused to break. They flew multiple sorties a day, often exhausted and running on pure adrenaline. Churchill would later immortalize these men with his famous words, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." In early September, a pivotal moment occurred. After a German bomber accidentally dropped its payload on London, a furious Churchill ordered a retaliatory raid on Berlin. The raid itself caused little physical damage, but the psychological impact on Hitler and Göring was enormous. Göring had boasted that no enemy bomb would ever fall on the German capital. Enraged and frustrated by the RAF's continued resistance, Hitler made a fatal strategic error. He ordered the Luftwaffe to switch its primary targets from the RAF's infrastructure to London and other major British cities. This marked the beginning of the third phase, known as the Blitz. On September 7th, a massive force of over 300 German bombers, escorted by 600 fighters, appeared over London in broad daylight. The city burned. The goal was to terrorize the civilian population, break their morale, and force the British government to surrender. But this shift in strategy, while devastating for the people of London, gave the RAF the breathing room it desperately needed. The attacks on the airfields lessened, giving Fighter Command time to repair, rearm, and regroup. The battered airfields and radar stations were able to recover. The final, decisive day came on September 15th, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched two enormous waves of attacks against London, believing the RAF was on its last legs. But they were met by a massive and coordinated response from Fighter Command. The skies over southern England were filled with swirling dogfights as every available Spitfire and Hurricane was thrown into the fray. The German formations were broken up, suffering heavy losses. It was a stunning display of defiance. The scale of the German losses on September 15th was a shock to the Luftwaffe High Command. They realized that far from being destroyed, the RAF was still a powerful and organized fighting force. 2 days later, Hitler quietly postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. While bombing raids on cities continued for months, the main daylight battle for air superiority was over. The RAF had won. So, how did they do it? It was a combination of factors. The courage and skill of the few, the technological edge of the Spitfire and radar, the brilliant command and control of the Dowding system, and the critical German mistake of switching targets from military to civilian centers. The Battle of Britain was Germany's first major defeat of the war. It proved that the Nazi war machine was not invincible. The victory was monumental. It ensured Britain's survival as a bastion of freedom and a base from which the war could be continued. It preserved a platform for the eventual liberation of Europe. Without the victory in the Battle of Britain, there would have been no base for American forces to build up in, no D-Day landing, and the history of the 20th century could have been tragically different. The battle demonstrated for the first time that air power alone could be a decisive factor in a major campaign. It was a victory won by a nation that refused to give in, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of tyranny. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as inspiring as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to Moments in History channel for more deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. Let us know in the comments what other battles you'd like to see covered. See you next time.